Trump talks on TV like he's going to erase Iran from the map. But the thing he's actually erasing is purchasing power in his own country, and in yours. He sold this war as strength, speed, energy dominance, and a quick return to normal. Then oil and natural gas jumped, shipping insurance exploded, and households quietly ate the bill. That's the miscalculation. You can't torch a fuel hub near the Strait of Hormuz and expect discounts. Want a quick reality check before we go macro? Open your banking app and find your last gas, diesel, or electricity charge. Now compare it to the same week last year. And don't round down. Does that look like winning? Or like a tax nobody voted for? And here's the weird part that makes people underestimate the danger. Your street still looks normal, your lights still work, and most shelves still look stocked. No curfews, no blackouts, no Mad Max convoys. At least not where cameras point. So were the doomsayers wrong about an oil catastrophe? Or are we just watching a slow-motion collision where the crash sound hasn't arrived yet? Today I'm making this interactive, so you feel the mechanism, not the mood. I'll ask you to guess what happens next, before I reveal what the data implies. Because once you see the plumbing of oil, the headlines start to look like theater. I'm Amy, this is Amy Invests, and we're going to follow the barrel. Not the talking points, not the spin, not the outrage cycle, the barrel itself. By the end, you'll know why fine can be the most dangerous signal in markets. Oil doesn't travel by magic. It travels by very slow steel and slower bureaucracy. Picture a supertanker longer than 4 football fields, built to carry liquid history. It carries roughly 2 to 3 million barrels in one trip, depending on crude and route. Sounds massive until you remember the world burns about 100 million barrels a day. Now, question for you. How fast do you think that tanker actually moves? Take a second and guess, before I answer, and be honest. Most people imagine something like a fast cargo ship slicing through the ocean. In reality, it cruises around 10 to 15 knots on a good day. That's basically a bicycle, except the bicycle weighs a skyscraper and turns like one. So, global energy supply lines move at cycling speed across an entire planet. Here's another question. What happens if one choke point becomes dangerous overnight? Do you take a side street, or do you go around a continent? In oil shipping, the detour can mean rounding the Cape of Good Hope below Africa. That adds weeks, not hours, and weeks are lethal when inventories are thin. Weeks matter because refineries run on rigid schedules, not vibes or patriotic speeches. If you stop loading oil today, oil still arrives tomorrow in many places. It arrives because it was already sold, financed, and physically at sea. That time lag is why the first month can feel strangely survivable and oddly calm. The shock exists, but it's still in transit, like thunder following lightning. And transit time is the quiet villain of this entire story. Let's play a game called Who Feels It First, because timing is the whole trick. I'll describe a country and you guess its vulnerability before I answer. Country A is rich, has a strong currency, large reserves, and friendly credit markets. Country B imports almost everything, pays in a weak currency, and has small stockpiles. Which one hits fuel lines first when global supply shrinks? Exactly. Country B, even if both are equally dependent on imports. Because the global oil market is one auction, and auctions punish the poor immediately. When Middle Eastern supply drops, buyers don't politely wait their turn like a queue. They scramble for replacement barrels from anywhere else, even if quality is worse. That scramble pushes prices up for everyone, including countries still receiving deliveries. So you can be fully supplied on paper and still bleed money at the pump. Meanwhile, the earliest visible symptoms pop up in the least covered places on Earth. You get stations that ration, then stations that close, then commuters that stay home. Governments try creative austerity, office closures, reduced school days, driving limits, dimmed cities. Think Sri Lanka-style days off, Laos-style closures, and sudden curfews that sound unrelated. It's not because they hit zero oil overnight and wake up empty. It's because every additional barrel now costs a premium they cannot subsidize. And when a government can't absorb that premium, it rations demand by policy. Here's a prediction you can test. Watch for flight cancellations next in your region. Airlines are the canary, because jet fuel is non-negotiable and brutally priced. Now let's zoom into the part nobody wants to admit on cable news. Your pump price isn't set only by your local station or your local refinery. It's set by global bidders fighting over a shrinking pool of barrels and molecules. Think of oil like concert tickets with dynamic pricing during a surprise tour drop. The arena didn't change, but suddenly every fan is desperate and clicking refresh. And desperation makes people do stupid things with inventory and with politics. Companies hoard fuel, governments pre-buy cargoes, and traders front-run expected policy moves. Each protective move tightens the market a little more for everyone else. Interactive moment. What do you cut first when energy rises and budgets get tight? Driving, eating out, streaming subscriptions, or home upgrades like renovations and appliances? Most people cut the optional trips first, because that hurts least. Businesses cut the optional shipments first because that protects margins temporarily. Then the optional becomes normal, and normal becomes too expensive, and habits change. That's how standards of living fall without a single dramatic event on your street. It's also why politicians love to focus on pump prices alone. Like that's the whole story. Pump prices are visible, emotional, and easy to blame on a villain of the week. Supply chain contraction is quieter, delayed, and politically harder to own, but contraction is the bigger story, because it kills growth before it kills comfort. Growth is what makes debt manageable, wages rising, and jobs plentiful. When energy scarcity squeezes growth, everything else gets fragile at the same time. So why do prices sometimes dip right after terrifying war news and ship attacks? Because oil isn't only traded as physical barrels you can refine tomorrow, it's traded as paper promises called futures, swaps, and structured bets. Futures are expectations about what oil will cost later, not oil you can pour today. Those expectations can smooth volatility, but they can also delay reality and discourage conservation. If a leader hints a deal is close, traders sell and prices dip on your screen. The public sees the dip and keeps consuming, like the crisis ended during lunch. And that's where Trump's messaging becomes economically dangerous, even if it's politically convenient. When he promises victory any day, he feeds the market a sedative, not a solution. Maybe he's bluffing. Maybe he's optimistic. Maybe he just needs good headlines. Either way, the result is the same: slower adaptation by households and businesses. A second sedative is emergency stockpiles, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve style releases. Strategic reserves are the world's pantry for energy emergencies, coordinated through groups like the IEA. Releasing them can plug a gap for weeks, sometimes months, and calm voters. But a pantry is not a farm, and a release is not production. Once you empty it, you can't empty it again no matter how loud you tweet. And refilling it later, at high prices, becomes its own inflation wave and political fight. So the calm you feel can be manufactured for a short time with real tools. Manufactured calm is not safety, it's postponement dressed up as leadership. And postponement is expensive when the missing supply is structural, not temporary. Here's the part I want you to visualize, like 3 countdown timers on a bomb squad screen. Timer 1 is the last pre-war tanker reaching its destination and unloading. Timer 2 is how long reserves and emergency releases can keep flooding the market. Timer 3 is how long the market believes peace is imminent, even when it isn't. When those 3 timers hit 0 together, the mood changes overnight, not because people panic in the streets, but because systems hit hard constraints. Stations don't raise prices. They post signs that say, out, no deliveries, cash only. Utilities don't ask nicely. They curtail industrial demand and protect critical users first. Airlines don't tighten belts. They ground planes, cut routes, and raise prices brutally. Retailers don't manage. They shrink selection, stop discounting, and ration via availability. If you want a simple indicator, watch delivery windows online for normal household items. First it's 2 days, then 5, then delayed, then currently unavailable. That's scarcity, arriving in civilian clothes without a single dramatic headline. And it creates political pressure for interventions that often backfire. Price caps sound compassionate, but they can worsen shortages by boosting consumption. Subsidies sound helpful, but they can increase demand at the worst possible time. Export bans sound protective, but they trigger retaliation and tighter global supply. Each policy can be rational locally and destructive globally, all at once. This is why oil shocks often spiral instead of resolving cleanly. They're not just energy events, they're coordination failures under stress. Now let's go beyond prices, into the thing economists fear most because it lasts. It's called demand destruction, and it's exactly what it sounds like in real life. When supply drops enough, Some demand doesn't come back even after prices settle. Not because people don't want the lifestyle, but because they can't afford it. Imagine the world lost 20% of its food supply for a year. You wouldn't call that inflation, you'd call it a crisis with permanent scars. Energy is similar, because energy is embedded in food, transport, housing, and manufacturing. So a 20% cut doesn't mean 20% pricier life, like a neat spreadsheet. It means a smaller economy that does fewer things, builds less, travels less, and hires less. Here are the dominoes I'm watching, and I want you to add yours in comments. Airlines first, because jet fuel is non-negotiable and route math is ruthless. Shipping second, because high fuel and insurance kill low-margin trade instantly. Semiconductors third, because fabs need power and gas-linked inputs like helium. Construction fourth, because cement, steel, glass, and lumber are energy-intensive at every step. Fertilizer fifth, because agriculture is basically natural gas turned into yields through chemistry. Put those together, and you get fewer goods, fewer homes, tighter budgets, and pricier food. That's not an inconvenience. That's a standard of living reset that voters can feel. And resets create anger, scapegoats, and rushed policy that can deepen the wound. This is how a foreign war becomes domestic instability, without a single enemy soldier. It happens through invoices, canceled plans, and shrinking options 1 week at a time. Now, the uncomfortable twist. Even a ceasefire may not fix the timeline you're hoping for, because infrastructure doesn't heal on a press conference schedule or a campaign calendar. Refineries, terminals, pipelines, and grids can be damaged, understaffed, or uninsured for years. Insurance stays expensive, financing stays tight, and output stays constrained longer than attention spans. Then, winter shows up like a second exam you didn't study for. Summer is when countries normally refill gas storage for cold months and heating demand. In a shortage, they burn storage to survive the present and to calm voters. That sets up a second wave when heating demand spikes and replacement supply isn't ready. Picture Europe, Asia, and North America competing for the same molecules at the same time. Somebody wins, somebody loses, and loses can mean cold homes or shuttered factories. So what can you do practically without turning into a doomer or a prepper cliche? Start by building cash flow flexibility, because rigid budgets break before markets do. Avoid stacking new fixed payments on top of uncertain essentials like food, fuel, and rent. If you invest, diversify, and respect inflation-sensitive sectors, balance sheet strength, and policy risk. If you run a business, audit where fuel, freight, and fertilizer touch your costs. Replace single points of failure before they announce themselves with a very expensive surprise. And don't let political theater replace personal preparation, because theater doesn't pay bills. Trump may think he's punishing Iran, but he's punishing households everywhere with physics. He didn't just misjudge Iran's resilience, he misjudged energy logistics and market psychology. If you want more sharp, actionable breakdowns, subscribe to Amy Invests.